Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Shefali Chaturvedi, and I head the developmental initiatives work within the CII. I'd like to welcome all the participants as well as all the speakers who have gathered here today to talk about a topic which is on creating barrier-free workplaces. This is the second online session that CII is conducting as part of a series of 4 sessions that we have planned for all of you. The objective of all these sessions is that we should be able to raise awareness and be able to create an inclusive workforce within the corporate sector. We should be able to understand the recently passed disability bill, and we should find practical solutions to the challenges and issues that each one of us within our companies is either facing, which is good because that means that we are paying attention to making workplaces inclusive, and if we are not, the challenges and issues that you may find daunting in case you start, and therefore we are presenting to you practitioners, experts who are already either working on it on their companies or have some advice to offer to you as to what you should be looking for. So without too much of a preamble into it, I would really like to mention that today's session is going to focus on making workplaces accessible. How do you sensitize top management as well as the rest of the employees? Understanding what kind of workplace adjustments that you need to do, what kind of assistive technologies you might need to provide for your employees, and the policy measures that are required to create barrier-free environment. We are focusing primarily on workplace today, and we will together try and find solutions to primarily the physical barriers, but we will also touch upon some of the attitudinal barriers that each one of us faces within our companies when we are looking to hire persons with disability. I would now like to invite my colleague from the Sector Skill Council for Persons with Disability, Dr. Niharika Nigam, to give her opening remarks, and then I would like to invite the speakers.
Very good afternoon, and thanks, Shefali. It is an honor to represent Skill Council for Persons with Disability. I'm heading the Standards and Quality Assurance Department of the Council. These webinars have been a very great initiative by CII and SAPWD in order to bridge the gap between the policy and the practice. For those audience who have not been with us previously, I would like to give a brief about Skill Council. The Skill Council for Persons with Disability was incepted in October 2015 in order to offer persons with disabilities meaningful, industry-relevant, skill-based training. The organization was promoted by Confederation of Indian Industry under the aegis of Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship and Ministry of Social Justice and Empowerment. It targets skill development of people with disabilities as per industry needs, which can help them to be gainfully employed and contribute to India's growing economy. Though for the past many years, there has been an increased awareness so far as the sensitization and the needs of the PWD is concerned amongst the employers and the community at large. Still, people with disabilities face many challenges, as rightly pointed out by Shefali, my colleague, and the barriers from everyday range from the physical barriers to the systemic barriers in employment and civic programs. Yet often the most difficult barriers are the attitudinal barriers. Why they arise amongst us is whether the fact of ignorance or fear or misunderstanding, or these attitudes keep people from appreciating and experiencing the full potential of a person with disability. We often end up underestimating the actual potential of a person with disability. The other aspects also include lack of the infrastructural accessibility, the lack of the right kind of an assistive technology which is required, the negative attitude of the people, and the complete culture of the organization which has to flow from the head to the down the line people working in the system. I'm sure that today's learned speakers will definitely share their views, and we are able to achieve a very well and meaningful outcome of our discussions today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Niharika. I'd like now like to turn to the speakers. So our first speaker for today's session is Ruchira Savane. Ruchira Savane specializes in universal design and leads the accessibility initiative at the DEOC. Apart from this, Ruchira is the principal architect and founder of two design organizations, Ode to Design and Ode to Dreams. Ruchira is a gold medalist from Malviya National Institute of Technology, Jaipur. She brings over 15 years of experience in design and software. She's a member of the Council of Architecture and has been associated with prestigious organizations advising them on barrier-free built environment. Ruchira will be sharing important aspects of universal design, accessibility standards, national building code, and access audit. Over to you, Ruchira.
Thank you. Thank you, Shefali and Dr. Niharika for the introduction and giving such a lovely background. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Ruchira and I'll run you through this vast topic of universal design and accessibility. I hope I'm able to do justice in the time that I've been allocated. So I would just give a brief about what I will be covering in this session. We will go through universal design and accessibility. There are a few principles of universal design that we'll touch upon. We will then move to accessibility standards and what they are, followed by an overview of how organizations can make their infrastructure, both existing as well as proposed, accessible for people with disabilities. And with that, I will leave with a few pertinent questions. So to begin with, accessibility is a very, very focused concept which is focused on persons with disabilities, and hence, if I may quote, the term special needs comes into picture. Whereas universal design is a very broad concept. It refers to broad spectrum of ideas meant to produce buildings, products, and environments that are inherently accessible to older people, people without disabilities, and people with disabilities. So this is a very, very vast and broad concept in design that caters to a large spectrum of people. So hence it's more inclusive, and we could say that accessibility is a derivative of universal design. For example, if I have to quote, there are instances where we see that there is a special entrance, again in quotes, a special entrance for anybody with disability to enter a building premises, which is sometimes, which may or may not meet standards, but may be located at the rear end of the building or too far from the main reception, and that's when a person may feel left out or may feel differentiated. Whereas the same entrance, if it is designed with universal design principles in mind, with a nice auto door which is wide enough for taking wheelchairs or a person who's walking with a pram or a stroller, everyone benefits alike. So that basically outlines the first principle of universal design, which is again this slide shows that universal design caters to this vast segment of people, from elderly to a pregnant person to a person on wheelchair, somebody with a small kid in the lap, children. So people with or without disabilities all benefit alike. So the first principle of universal design is equitable use, which I just outlined in my previous slide, where everyone benefits from this auto door irrespective of their condition or whether they are on a wheelchair or a shopping cart is being strolled around. Flexibility in use is another principle where we can see in this slide that a left and a right-handed person can use this scissor conveniently because it's a large grip scissor. So this we see in workplaces where there are training rooms and there are chairs designed for a right-hander to write. But the same chair, if it is done with universal design in mind, can cater to both left and right-handers. So flexibility in use is another principle. Simple and intuitive design. So even if this slide shows an emergency situation where a kid is able to perceive the emergency and go and press a alarm button. So that is the simple and intuitive design that we talk about when it comes to universal design. Perceptible information, which is even without seeing it's not necessary for a user to see the keys on a cell phone, but just by the bumps on the keypad, one is able to figure out which is a on and off button. So tactile information is very, very important and crucial for somebody with a vision impairment. Tolerance for error. So this design minimizes hazards and the adverse consequences of accidental or unintended actions. A classic example in products, what we see is undo and redo. So quickly, I can redo or undo my mistakes on a computer without feeling hassled. That's to do with tolerance for errors. Low physical effort. Often we see in workplaces there are doors with very, very difficult to operate knobs and handles. So the other principle is low physical effort, where with minimal effort one can open and get their way through. So this is an example of a lever type of a door handle here. And finally, it talks about size and space for approach and use. So as is seen in this slide that we are looking at right now, appropriate size and space is provided for approach and reach, manipulation, and use regardless of user's body size, posture, or mobility. So these are turnstiles which a person who's walking as well as one on wheelchair can access conveniently. So these principles of universal design, when applied, we should not just focus on built environment and transport, but take it to all levels of all levels of infrastructure, starting from roads, subways, footpaths, buildings, transport to products and services. They should not be left out too. So talking ATMs and banking services, computer phones, microwave, everything should be designed with universal design principles in mind. And information system and technology, where websites, applications, mailers and media also could be looked at with universal design principles. So the bottom line is accessibility helps all, and there is a very strong relation between universal design and accessibility. To a large extent, this will break the mindset barriers that we have. For instance, same language subtitles in a television program would be helpful for somebody who's a hearing impaired person, as well as help somebody who finds it difficult to follow the accent. Ramps at the entrance for prams and trolleys would be useful for a person who's strolling them, as well as for a wheelchair user. Likewise, better signage will help everyone, leave apart persons with hearing impairment. So how do we achieve universal design in a built environment or an infrastructure? Now, this is something that is not left to anyone's imagination, not even a designer or an architect. There are accessibility standards which play a very, very crucial role here. And they cater to, often when we talk about disability and making infrastructure accessible, it is largely focused on people with mobility impairment, somebody using a wheelchair, or somebody who's finding it difficult to walk. We provide ramps and lifts and leave it at that, thinking that we've been able to make our infrastructure accessible. But the fact of the matter is, in doing so, we are excluding a large range of other disabilities like people who have difficulty seeing, hearing, learning, etc. And even in mobility impairment, there is a range from somebody who's walking to finding it difficult to walk, to limping, to using crutches, wheelchairs being different sizes and kinds, from manual to automatic. So hence, all the more reason to cater to look at standards, accessibility standards, which when followed, we would have catered to a large number of disabilities and not just one particular area, which is mobility impairment. Having said that, user feedback is also extremely crucial because leaving infrastructure saying that we've followed the accessibility standards would not eliminate the requirement to doing some reasonable accommodations specifically customized for a person. Supposing somebody asks for a support for a furniture which could be a chair or a desk or a higher seat in a WC, so those could also be looked into. And that's what we call as reasonable accommodation. So one cannot assume that 100% needs are covered if standards are followed, maybe just 95%, and for the rest 5% we could look at reasonable accommodation. So what are these accessibility standards or guidelines? There are 4 that I would like to bring to this forum's notice. The very first is Handbook on Barrier-Free and Accessibility by CPWD of 2014. Harmonized guidelines and space standards for barrier-free built environment for persons with disability and elderly persons. This is by Ministry of Urban Development of 2015. The National Building Code of India, where we refer to the Part 3 Development Control Rules and General Building Requirements, and then the ISO standards, which is the International Organization for Standardization. ISO 21542 2011 is the standard to look at. So we can see that there is a bit of a anarchy here with 4 set of standards in play, but I would say that National Building Code of India is the standard. Currently the one that we have is the NBC of 2005, where Annexure D, special requirements for planning of public buildings meant for use of physically challenged, is present. It is dated and it has been largely rejected by the disability sector because it doesn't cater to a lot of disabilities. But this is under revision as well right now, and the new NBC will be out anytime very soon. So what happened 2 years back was NCPEDP came to know that the new NBC will also have this annexure which will alienate the concept of accessibility and just restrict it to an annexure which may be a oversight for professionals as well as people who are involved in construction. So DEOC was commissioned this exercise of looking at the entire NBC, where we looked into all the 12 chapters of NBC and gave our comments so that no area is left behind or lagging behind. For instance, a lift chapter or a plumbing chapter or fire safety chapter. This is purely from the standpoint that any professional who's a plumbing expert may not go to an annexure which is part of Part 3 of NBC, and that's why the need to review the entire set. A lot of our recommendations have been followed and they will be out soon. So once 2015 NBC is out, that would be the standard that we would refer to. And with the new RPD Act of 2016, it would be a must for buildings to become accessible, and hence standards are even more crucial now. So steps to making an infrastructure accessible, the very first step is an access audit, which is more like a diagnosis. Without a correct diagnosis, a correct treatment is not possible. Here we look at a building or an infrastructure which is existing or which is upcoming against predetermined standards to judge the current state of accessibility of a building. Once an access audit is performed, there are a set of recommendations or implementation strategy which is proposed. So implementation and retrofitting follows, and followed by maintenance, where we don't leave any infrastructure with which has all the accessibility standards in place at an implementation stage, but ensure that they are being maintained well. Often with our experience, we've seen that there are railings done next to the ramp, but there are floor planters kept next to them. So it makes reach to the railing difficult. So maintenance becomes very crucial as well in a workspace post access audit. Why carry out an access audit? As I just mentioned, this is the first step to come up with an access improvement plan or strategy. We look at the good and bad practices. We chalk out the areas for improvement and give the current accessibility status of the building. So when access audit is done, it's a sequence through the built environment, starting from the very first point, the next slide, which is getting to the premises from the drop-off areas, to parking, to the pathways, getting into the premises, which includes steps and ramps, entrance doors and thresholds, reception areas, and then the lateral circulation within the building. How do we go to various levels like lifts and staircases, floor surfaces, using the services in the premises, toilets and washrooms, very, very crucial. Access to eating areas, looking at even the furniture, lighting arrangements, switches, handles and controls, telephones, alarms and acoustics. Getting out of the building, which is the fire exit system, fire exits and escape routes, emergency lighting and warning systems, safe refuge areas in event of fire, and then moving on to even managing the building, how the building is being kept. Are the routes clear and without obstructions? What kind of lighting is present? What is the attitude of staff? Publicity materials, menus, like when we look at cafeteria, we also look at whether they have a menu which is accessible to all. So that is part of the services and the maintenance of the building. So moving on, I will just touch upon ramps, which is one area which will just give a broad overview. Standards are many, and when we actually conduct an access audit, we look at the harmonized guidelines and NBC. Apart from that, we also look at some good practices from international standards. However, for this session, I'm just focusing on the harmonized guidelines. So what to look for when we look at access audit of a ramp? The very first thing is a gradient, which has to be correct, which most of the times is not. The railings and handrails, whether they are present, how they are extending on the landings, whether there are tactile indicators on the ramp so that a person with vision impairment can use them, start and end of ramp, whether there's enough turning area, and the surface of the ramp. Move on. Yeah. So this is how harmonized guidelines look like, and these are the standards for ramp. There are gradients given for rise. There is a standard for surface. The width of the ramp should be minimum 1200 mm, and the turning radius has to be provided. How the handrail has to extend, how it turns at the end of a ramp is visible in this slide, and how do we do tactile indicators. Moving on, I'll just show you with experience what we see usually. This ramp is done without railing on both the sides. It's a circular ramp. That's the problem here. A very, very steep ramp on the next slide where there are no handrails present and there is no tactile indicator. Likewise, here there is a surface which provides a very bumpy or a jerky movement of a wheelchair. There is no handrail on the other side. This handrail does not stretch. Steep gradient here without a tactile indicator. Again, the surface is not correct. Railings are not present. And this ramp ends into a door, while the standards say that there has to be a landing when a ramp ends. So this just broadly shows where the problems are. I think I'm running out of time. I had something to discuss about toilets as well, but maybe we will come back to that later. So what I'll leave with is a thought that 42, slide 42. That access audit is actually a beginning to an end. It's a means to an end, and it's the starting point, where from where on, we could look at a continuous improvement of an organization's accessibility and the basis for an access plan, pertinent questions for organizations to create a barrier-free workplace. The very first thing that we emphasize when we go and do an access audit or look at accessibility is insist on forming up an access council or an access board where all stakeholders come together so that there is a responsibility and an ownership for the initiative in an organization. Get an access audit done, that's a must, and the very first step, have an accessibility plan in place, which is fall through from the access audit, set aside resources who will drive the initiative in the organization, have a policy to ensure that any new place or built infrastructure should be accessible. The cost is negligible when it is done at design stage rather than retrofitting later. Modify procurement policy, train facilities with facilities people to maintain, very, very crucial, and take regular feedback for continuous improvement. Thank you very much. With that, I will over to Shefali again.
Thank you very much, Ruchira. That was a very, very insightful presentation that you gave. And for many of us, I think, who are attending this call, I think it was something which has really helped us understand what universal design actually means. You underscored the need for a universal design really being equitable design, flexible usage. You've talked about the building code that is currently being followed, the standards, and of course the all-important audit, which would really help us in making a plan, setting aside resources, making and modifying procurement policies that each one of us deals with in our organizations, and of course the necessity of an almost continuous feedback from the user to be able to make it something that sustains over a period of time and is actually does what it has set out to. Very interesting, and I'm sure not only would there be questions, but maybe even after this we would reach out to you, because I'm sure a number of companies would want to know how to go about this once they start integrating and incorporating universal design in their workplaces. I will now turn to Shrila Dasgupta. Shrila is an Associate Vice President and Head of Diversity and Inclusion at Tata Consultancy, Business Process Services. Shrila is an MPhil in Population Studies from Jawaharlal Nehru University. She's worked for over 2 decades in the development sector, focusing on human rights issues relating to gender, social inclusion, and public health. In her current role, Shrila focuses on issues relating to gender diversity, disability inclusion, cultural cohesion, and LGBT rights at the workplace. She also works with international, across different geopolitics and countries, being with the TCS. Shrila would today be sharing important aspects of creating barrier-free workplaces with respect to the different phases of the recruitment process. I think it's a very important nuance that we need to understand, that when you are, it's good to want to recruit persons with disability, but really what are the things that we need to be conscious of and careful about. So from her experience, Shrila would be sharing that with us. Over to you, Shrila.
Thank you, Shefali, for the very generous introduction. And I will probably weave into it a little more than recruitment because it's part of a larger whole. But Ruchira, thank you very much for the very useful presentation on universal access that you gave. I think a lot of us don't know a lot. So I'm waiting for my slide to come up, and I think I can just introduce like the basic background is that the Tata Group of Industries was set up in almost 150 years ago, and TCS is its IT/ITS company. We have more than 350,000 people, of which 1/3 are women, and we have footprints in about 46 countries and have about 131 nationalities working with us. I will actually stick to one slide which talk to you about the different life stages of access, of which recruitment is a very critical part. Can we go to the next one? Is a very critical part, but it does not happen in a vacuum. And that is, I think, what I really want to focus on today, is that it's part of a larger whole. And what we discussed last time also, I'm going to mention here, is that none of this, your recruitment or access at any point, cannot happen if you do not have a larger political will within the organization to move it forward. So, which emerges from multiple factors. One is that you have like a policy. We have a Tata Code of Conduct, which emphasizes the necessity of being equal opportunity employers, and all Tata Group companies follow that. At TCS, we have a diversity policy, which is fairly comprehensive. We also need to have like leadership commitment, because at the end of the day, I know Asif is going to deal with the whole issue of costs. But if you do not have leadership commitment, you're really not going to be able to pull this together. And you need to have the right kind of attitude, and which is a mix of sensitization, a mix of success stories that you can showcase, and a mix of empathy that people have. A couple of things that I want to tell everybody is that, you know, nobody should wait for everything to be perfect. It's the more to do with the journey that we have. At every point of time, there will be challenges which are thrown up. Don't wait for everything to be in place. It's easier to make those reasonable accommodations and say that, okay, fine, this is not working, let's see what is working. At the end of it, I think you will move towards perfection, but there are always going to be challenges. And one of the reasons why it is that, you know, disability is not heterogeneous, it's not homogeneous, and you have to be able to deal with that every orthopedic a person with orthopedic disability has different needs. So every person who is visually impaired may have different needs. So you have to deal with the fact that the need of every worker with a different disability may be different. So you cannot say that you have found the magic bullet and it's done and dealt with. So what we have found has worked for us at TCS is treating things case by case and creating solutions case by case. So, but overall, if I were to go along a linear continuum of access, for recruitment, we do set out job information through resource groups that we work with. The social media is something that young people access. When we go for campus recruitment, we put out job information. The access may not be perfect for everybody, but we at least try and make sure that we reach out to people. We have a very strong buddy program where by word of mouth we encourage young people to bring their family and friends, and that we find has worked well for us, even for recruitment for persons with disability. The interview access we've also learned on the job is we've realized that, you know, there are certain set questions. If you have somebody who is blind, you make sure that, and there is something written that requires to be done, you make sure that you have a JAWS software installed in the computers which are there for taking the tests. If you have somebody who's deaf and mute, if you do not have a speech interpreter at that point of time, because there was somebody who came and said, ma'am, we don't have a speech interpreter, what do we do? I said, that person I'm sure can read and write. So you just put the person and give the laptop. And this person sailed through because he was a very, very bright chap. So it is a case by case, and you found that there is a solution in everything. Don't stop and say there's a problem which you cannot overcome. So you create accesses, I think, by sheer common sense. I think, like, if I have to give one piece of advice to everybody, just use common sense. If you have empathy and you have common sense, I think you can create access without any problem. The next phase immediately, which is also like, you know, it's a continuity post-recruitment because we've still not placed people, is the induction program. And that is where we have like a 12-day initial learning program for freshers. And that, again, we've started having speech interpreters in conjunction with an organization called Vani, so that everybody has access. And for our visually impaired associates, because we depend so heavily on the verbal teaching, that kind of gets taken care of. Then later on, when we are looking at placement, the barriers usually is that middle level managers, they keep telling us that, oh, I don't think so that it's possible to have people with disability in our process. What is important is that prior to that, if you have done a job mapping, because it is your arsenal to tell people that yes, it is possible to have them in your process. It is good to have allies from leadership or other managers who can also help to convince. And you look at infrastructure compatibility. Here also you have like a quick rain check kind of a thing. We once hired somebody, and because we have a large part of our buildings are rented buildings, we are unable to tell those owners to have the right kind of infrastructure. So so we almost didn't take somebody because we didn't have a wheelchair washroom. But when I delved deeper, I realized that the person is polio affected and doesn't need a wheelchair washroom, can use a male washroom as it is. So, which is why I say that just find out the details of what access requirements there are. So, the other thing that we've learned during the recruitment stage itself and later on is the whole issue of technology access. And now that we've moved big time into upskilling people to be able to meet the new kind of market demands, we realize that JAWS does not support graphics, which is why when we are like their data access, we cannot provide put them in processes where there's a lot of graphics or there's a lot of photographs and other visuals, because it is not possible for them to access that. Whereas we are trying to convert those, and the web-based trainings that we have for upskilling, we actually having readers to help them take those tests. So that is the reasonable accommodation we are trying to have to counter the issue. There are two things that I really want to talk about access. One is your access to safety, and where you do not have like a fire lift, or you do not have bulbs going off for persons with hearing impairment, we have a buddy system. We have a buddy tagging system so that you have somebody who's going to take you to safety. And access to leisure, which is a right. I'm part of the United Nations Special Committee on creating a booklet for disability inclusion at the workplace. And one of the things when you're looking at rights is the right to leisure. And so we have multiple, this I think came up as a question also last time about marathons, but we also have these games and we have extracurricular, and we believe that there needs to be access. So it's also, you find out, everybody may not be able to access everything, but how to make sure that everybody is included in some, if not all, these activities. So I think, like just go ahead and do it. Don't wait for the perfect moment. There's no Shubh Muhurt for this. You just have to move forward. With that, I will hand it back to Shefali.
Thank you very much, Srila. Absolutely fascinating what you've shared in terms of not just the journey of TCS with you in the lead, but also underscoring the importance of the will within the organization, starting from top management downwards to get it done. Very important points that you have left behind, which is, and you have emphasized on it, do not wait for perfection. Any time is a good time to start. Find out unique access requirements most things are commonsensical if you have the right will and just go ahead and start doing it. And I think that's what will get many more people to be attracted to come and work for an organization if they see you being accommodating in ensuring their needs and requirements are taken care of. You mentioned that everybody has different needs. There are no magic bullets. You've also talked about special provisions that you have done about buddies and others, which is very, very different and very interesting, of what happens. And I think the planning has been very detailed in terms of in an emergency what happens and a person feels secure and things like that. You've also talked about circumventing potential bottlenecks, and we all face that in our organizations, not just in trying to mainstream disabled employees, but on a day-to-day basis. And I think the key here is that you are able to address those issues, hear them out, and be able to solve them. And I think you're trying to do that within the TCS. So thank you very much. Aradhana Lal leads the sustainability initiative at Lemon Tree Hotels, including planet, environment, people inclusion, and diversity. Aradhana was with us in the first session as well, and she's really been a champion from the corporate sector for this cause. Aradhana is an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad. She brings with her 22 years of experience in sales, marketing, corporate communications, and sustainability. She co-leads recruit EWDs, that's economically disadvantaged, through the network of 27 hotels in 16 cities, and leads new initiatives in the disability space. Today there are 400 EWDs, employees with disabilities, that is 13% of the 3,200 strong employee base. Aradhana will cover important aspects of do-it-yourself. Do-it-yourself was an initiative that Aradhana and other authors together had done for the CII last year. It's a booklet on inclusion, a step-by-step guide. It has been developed by practitioners and experts on inclusion and accessibility from industry. And over to you, Aradhana.
Thank you, Shefali, and hello everyone. Aradhana here from Lemon Tree. In the first piece, Ruchira talked about the concept of universal access and accessibility and how buildings can get designed, and she took an example of a ramp specifically. What we tried to do in this do-it-yourself piece was we said that if any organization wants to start being inclusive, what will it need to do? There will be really two aspects. One is the physical aspect, which is to do with accessibility and infrastructure and IT and so on. And the second is the attitudinal one, which my colleague Sheila touched upon, about how the company approaches it and how they think. So in today's discussion, we'll stick to the first part of the do-it-yourself booklet. In the file that we're going to share right now, it's both the parts are present, but we won't talk about the second part. We'll only talk about the first part. We're just bringing up the file in a moment as well. This is the CII booklet known as Do It Yourself. So it's interesting to pay attention to that. As far as lifts are concerned, you will notice again there are dimensions prescribed for, firstly, how do you enter the lift? Because if it's a wheelchair user, it's important that they should be able to enter the door and not have a problem with that. And once they're inside, they have to be able to have the turning space and be able to maneuver themselves, which means they need handrails. So all of that is defined in terms of dimension and facility. So these are the 2 or 3 things you'll have to pay very important attention to when you want to set your building up to be accessible. You can move forward. That's another option for a ramp. Now coming to handrails. In the photographs Ruchira showed, there was a number of situations where handrails weren't there, and that's really not making your building accessible. So what's important with handrails is 2, 3 things. One is the height, of course. One is the ease with which you can move along it, because somebody may be trying to use it as an assistance to walk, as you can see a person with a walking stick, or as an assistance to move their wheelchair along, keeping in mind that you're moving against gravity. Maybe you might be moving against gravity. And the other aspect that's important is it needs to have tactile information for the visually impaired. Could you just lower it a bit? Hello. Also, what's important is that if it's the height is also linked to someone who's to both, to the visually impaired and the wheelchair, and therefore their needs have to be met equally. That's what the diagram below is trying to show. If you look to the right side, we're talking about corridors. Now this is interesting because you may have designed corridors to serve a particular purpose of just people moving up and down in the office. But what's really important is to look at the maneuverability and the circulation space and the turning space. The whole wheelchair needs to turn, and there are two alternates. One is that L-shaped corner, and the other is being able to make a U-turn. So there are two lanes, so to speak, parallelly, and you're being able to make a U-turn. So these are options for office design and building design. When we come to washrooms, 2-3 things need to be kept in mind. And since we are a hotel company, this is something that's really important for us, both from the public washroom perspective as well as the guest room washroom perspective, particularly in the guest room meant for the differently abled. The first simple thought is, from the room area or from the corridor, wherever they're going into the bathroom, there should be great ease in entering. So the surface of the floor, as well as the width of the door, as well as how the door opens. Because if you're going to have to pull, push, etc., it's absolutely illogical. So it must be a sliding door. And in fact, as hoteliers, I want to say that we actually put ourselves in a wheelchair in order to experience this at the design stage and say, what do we need to do? We felt that making it as real as possible would help us understand. So I recommend to the companies on the line, depending on how you're going to approach physical disability specifically, if you're going to focus on it, you might want to go through an experience to understand how it will work. So entrance is important. Being able to turn the wheelchair in a manner that you can be seated next to the WC to be able to slide from the wheelchair to the WC and back. This is something very, very crucial and tricky, because otherwise we cannot expect a person who's a wheelchair user to be pushing or jumping or lifting in any way, because this cannot happen. It's not going to happen. So that whole thought process of how will the person move from the wheelchair to the WC and back, that's important. So there are handrails, there are distances, all the measurements are mentioned in these diagrams. You can access this PDF file on the CII website, so I'm not talking about the dimensions, but you need to understand the concept here. The second thing is, when you look at the sink in the bathroom, even that needs to be at a height which can be accessed by a wheelchair as well as by a person who's standing. So there's something called adjustable sinks. They can actually be moved up and down, and that's what typically hotels do, and any public building can do so in their public bathroom as well, or they can build a number of sinks in that case. One can be lower, one can be higher. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that how do you access that, and there must be grab bars everywhere in the bathroom. We can go forward.
Item view multi-select list box. Untitled document. Sound recorder. Toolbar start recording button. Alt plus S.
The other subjects we've spoken about here is signage. I think it was referred to by Ruchira as well. In any building, it doesn't matter whether it's a hotel, an office, a factory, or even a residential building for that matter. It's important to have signs that are conveying certain things. What are they conveying? Firstly, information, just to know what is where and what's going on. And directional, so do I need to go left, right, backward, forward, upstairs, downstairs, which way do I need to go? Then warning signs, so safety signs are important. So what we try to put together in this figure was those signs that are recognized internationally and are used very, very commonly. There are actually several hundred signs, and I'm sure Ruchira will be able to throw more light on it. But the goal here was to put those that are very, very important and without which you can't really function. So here are some examples of that. In any case, when you do get into design, you will be employing an architect and you will be employing an accessibility expert. So you don't have to worry about missing out on something, because that expert will help you with this. I think that covers it today. I'll just see if there's anything else. Okay, there's information on, part B we don't need to go to. We can stay above part B. Part B is the attitude part. So we talked about different colors and contrasts that we need to use in this signage, and also text sizes. So when we are working in an organization where you've got people of different kinds of disabilities, it could be low vision, it could be visually impaired. Now, both these individuals respond, or can respond actually, to signage in a different way. If someone is 100% visually impaired, naturally they'll not be able to access the signage unless it is tactile. But those who have low vision, for them the text size and the contrast becomes very important to be able to get their bearings and move around. So I wanted to just touch upon a few important things today, and this booklet can be accessed for further information, and of course the 4 references that Ruchira gave us for much more detailed information. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Aradhana. I think you have emphasized on issues that Ruchira has also brought up. We talked about intuitive planning, and you've really also emphasized on experiential planning. So put yourself into the shoes of the person or the people, and therefore then plan to be able to really get it right. And I think that's very important. While we wait, maybe we can just, I was wondering if, between Srila and Aradhana, you can tell us that both of you have mentioned that you don't really have to, you mentioned don't have to wait for perfection and you learn as you go along. Aradhana, you've talked about experiential, putting yourself. So do you really, did your companies really get it right in the first go? Or was it something which has taken a lot of trial and error, learn as you go along, and what are the kind of, let's say, suggestions that come from those who are actually, using these facilities? That I think would be important for those who are participating in the call. Yes, it is important to get it right. Yes, it is important that you follow the principles of universal design. But having said that, most of us, get into things thinking that, yeah, it's like, we can figure it out. It's common sense. As we grow in the organization today, I only have 2 persons. When I have 200, I would, perhaps need to change everything. There's that whole element of cost. There's that whole element of resources that we all deal with. So in your experiences, if you can briefly talk about, how have employees really contributed helping you change and adapt, and how difficult or easy it might have been. While we're waiting for Asif, we'll just address these 2 points.
Okay, just quickly, is that no, I don't think we got it right. I don't even think that we get it right every time, even now, even though we've been at it for a while. But I think each day is a new learning. For instance, I think yesterday or the day before, in one of our locations, the only lift that we have got out of order. So the way we worked it around is that to figure out where on the ground floor we can accommodate persons with physical disability, so that there is no there is no gap in the productivity. So each day you probably have to make these kind of new negotiations and new adjustments and things like that. And what was the other question that you had?
Essentially just wanting to know that,
there is one thing that I want to say is that if you have 1 or you have 200, I think the commitment to providing supportive access is non-negotiable. And I do not understand this thing about that, okay, when we are going to have so many, then we look at it, or the fact that we are not going to have 200 because it's going to cost too much. When you have a workplace, you provide your workers with basic facilities. So a washroom is a basic facility, whether previously you had men or then you had women. And I think I said in the last call also, like, I've been part of the women's movement, and 20 years ago we were making these arguments to make sure that we had washrooms for women, and now we are kind of making this argument so that we have washrooms for persons with disability. So I think if you have workers, the workers will need some basic facilities, and we provide them. Over to Aradhana.
I want to speak of 2 things. One is, when you're doing universal access design of buildings, I will be referring to hotels because that's my large experience. You may be following guidelines and rules with respect to the public areas of your building, which are going to be used by the public, so to speak, versus what you have in your back areas or areas that are used only by a set of people. So sometimes, due to the constraint of space, etc., you may make some changes in your plan, or you may not be able to follow the universal access fully. Now, if you're trying to be an equal opportunity employer and you're looking at hiring people with physical disability, visual, hearing, you're going to have to not do that. You're going to have to make sure that your back area is actually as much a front area as your front area is. So that's one thing that you change. As a hotel organization, you have to change your thinking when it comes to being an equal opportunity employer. Secondly, even in public areas or back areas, wherever you're doing design, sometimes you can have a glitch which is very, very small and could have easily gone undetected. So I'll give you an example. In one of our big hotels, which is built by Universal Access Standard and designed by very specific architects and people who understand this, when you move from the lobby to the external facade area, which leads you to restaurants and so on, there is actually a situation where the ground is not at equal level with the lobby. It is about 1 inch or less than an inch below. So at the door of the lobby and at the door of each restaurant, you find that that place is about an inch different from the ground level. So therefore, the movement of a wheelchair will require assistance. Now, this looks like it's a very small gap or error or whatever you want to call it, but actually it's not, because that means you've suddenly made your 4 or 5 restaurants inaccessible to the local guest who comes on a wheelchair and is trying to get from the lobby to those places. So you have to be careful. There is another route to take them, but that's not really practical. The second thing I want to speak of to all the organizations on the line is that it is about employees, certainly, and we are talking about being equal opportunity employers, but it is also about customers. So stop and think for a minute. You may not be a hotel company, you may be a bank, you may be a financial service, you may be a BPO, you may be a manufacturing unit. There are going to be some customers who are going to come to your premises. Maybe they'll be there in hundreds if you're a hotel or a restaurant, or they'll be there in the handfuls if you're in a manufacturing unit. What you have to consider is, if you make your brand accessible and by extension of that your buildings accessible, this means you opened up your customer base to a whole new segment that were previously not your customers. So you have to consider it from that element as well, and look at this whole experiential issue as, if I were a person with disability and I wanted to use my own brand, how was I going to use it? If I were a bank, if I were manufacturing cars, if I were a hotel as we are, or any other business. So it's not just about the employees and being equal opportunity employer. It is very, very importantly about your customer and making it accessible to the public at large. Thank you.
So thank you for your feedback, which will help us in organizing these sessions to be more effective in the future. To you.